So this morning, I spoke to you at considerable length about how the goal of social justice is revolution. And I spoke to you about how critical theory can be used to dissolve a liberal society by exploiting its reliance upon responsible criticism. This afternoon, I want to kind of talk to you about some of this again, but in a different way, and hopefully I'll remind you of an alternative. Critical methods are designed, they've told us, to be emancipatory. They aim to emancipate oppressed people, and this is a noble and lofty goal, at least on paper. The questions are what people are to be emancipated from, and how. Injustice, sure, unfairness, that's what they say. But what kind of injustice and what kind of unfairness? Turns out that panel just really set me up great. I'm so happy. So there is, of course, everything you would expect: bigotry, discrimination, disenfranchisement, and I say good. We can join them in wanting to emancipate people from all of those problems, and I dare say you do already. There's more to it, though, than you might think. Not because social justice advocates are bad people, most of them certainly are not. The failure is much more dangerous and much more human than that. It's one that has been exacerbated by their embrasure and reliance upon critical theory. It's that they don't understand the things they're criticizing. Like I said this morning, I want to show you what I'm talking about. So to get an idea, let's turn to a feminist theorist and philosopher, Kelly Oliver. She's now at Vanderbilt University in my own home state of Tennessee. And she reminds us that the goal of critical theory is revolution, and then tells us more. In 1989, she wrote, "I propose that in order to be revolutionary, feminist theory cannot claim to describe what is, or natural facts. Rather, feminist theories should be political tools, strategies for overcoming oppression in specific, concrete situations. The goal, then, of feminist theory should be to develop strategic theories, not true theories, not false theories, but strategic theories. This strategy for theory making does away with the monodimensional power structure which polarizes all theories as true or false. Theory legitimation no longer rests with the absolute authority of the truth of nature. Feminist theories can be conscious strategies with which to undermine and dissolve the oppressive strategy of patriarchy, one part of which is the construction of the absolute authority of recalcitrant nature." So, just like I told you earlier today, critical theory is not particularly concerned with truth. It is concerned with political change. And Kelly Oliver tells us this explicitly. Feminist theory, in order to be revolutionary, should not necessarily attempt to be true. It should be strategic. It should not defer to the absolute authority of the truth of nature. It sees that as a political strategy to hold women down, as patriarchy. Feminist theories, she says, should be political tools, conscious strategies to undermine and dissolve the oppression of believing that there is absolute authority in the truth of nature. The absolute authority of the truth of nature is the absolute authority of reality. Part of the point of the social justice revolution is to place reality second to its political concerns. So on some level, at least, social justice wants to emancipate us from the unfairness of reality. This isn't going to go well, because reality is the thing you run into when your beliefs are false. So I want to tell you another story from my childhood. This one's not as good. Well, it's better. It's not as funny. I didn't do any jump kicks. I was in first grade, and it was a snow day in East Tennessee, so I was home from school, and I was watching TV, even though it was a Tuesday. The date was January 28th, 1986. It was about 11:30 in the morning. You know, I've always loved space, astronomy, rockets, astronauts, the human story, and the ultimate environment. I still go out and look at the stars, the planets, at Jupiter, almost every night. I try to catch the International Space Station as it passes overhead whenever I can. If you haven't seen it, you should. You can see it even in London when it's not cloudy. It's even brighter than Jupiter. I know it's always cloudy in London, I'm just kidding. It traces its way slowly across the evening sky and it's really bright. It's actually brighter than Venus, but we're not going to get nerdy about this. There are people living on it right now. And they got there in rockets. So I was home from school on Tuesday, January 28th, 1986, watching a rocket launch on TV. The Space Shuttle Challenger did not make it to orbit that day. The astronauts on board did not go to space. They never came home. They, riding proudly in the most technologically advanced craft that humanity has ever designed, ran into reality at 11:39 a.m. that morning. It was the smallest thing. These tiny gaskets, O-rings, they call them. We've all heard about that for 33 years now. Turns out they don't work when they're too cold. I was home that day because it had snowed in East Tennessee, because it was too cold across the southeastern United States. For some reasons, though, and against the advice of the engineers who knew better, certain people believed it would be fine. There would be no problem. But reality is the thing you run into when your beliefs are false. So Kelly Oliver, she's just one theorist, and that was 30 years ago, right? So here's another, writing in 2017. As we just talked about, Allison Bailey is a feminist and social justice epistemologist. It is her job to talk about how we produce knowledge and what it is for. She's very influential in critical pedagogy, which is using critical theory to inform the theory of education, or teaching critical theory. Bailey writes, the critical thinking tradition is concerned primarily with epistemic adequacy. To be critical is to show good judgment in recognizing when arguments are faulty, assertions lack evidence, truth claims appeal to unreliable sources, or concepts are sloppily crafted and applied. Critical pedagogy regards the claims that students make in response to social justice issues not as propositions to be assessed in their truth value, but as expressions of power that function to reinscribe and perpetuate social inequalities. Its mission is to teach students ways of identifying and mapping how power shapes our understandings of the world. This is the first step toward resisting and transforming social injustices. So if it's about social justice issues, it needn't be assessed in terms of truth, because it's all about power. Social justice will emancipate us from epistemic adequacy, from having our beliefs be constrained by the truth. Bailey then goes on to wax cynically about how we generate knowledge. To extend Audre Lorde's classic metaphor, she writes, the tools of the critical thinking tradition, for example, validity, soundness, conceptual clarity, cannot dismantle the master's house. They can temporarily beat the master at his own game, but they can never bring about any enduring structural change. They fail because the critical thinker's toolkit is commonly invoked in particular settings at particular times to reassert power. Those adept with these tools often use them to restore an order that assures their comfort. Pause to appreciate that Bailey is making it clear to us that the critical in critical thinking, which is commonly invoked to reassert power, is not the same critical as in critical theory, which she thinks is a better alternative. So, critical thinking, validity, soundness, conceptual clarity, we might add reliance upon reason, logic, and evidence. These, Allison Bailey tells us, cannot create emancipation because they were created by power in order to reassert power. This was 2017, very influential paper. Social justice will free us from validity, from soundness, from conceptual clarity, from reason, from logic, and from a reliance upon evidence. So maybe you agree with me that climate change is a very serious issue that we should all be concerned about. There's even a major climate protest right outside. Now, this protest, if you've read any of the literature around it, isn't about climate change. It's about something different called climate justice. It's about making climate change into a social justice issue. Quoting Bailey again, critical pedagogy regards the claims that students make in response to social justice issues not as propositions to be assessed in their truth values. I don't know about you, but I care enough about climate change not to see it reframed as a social justice issue with its propositions not to be assessed according to their truth. I'd rather not be emancipated from the truth because reality is the thing you run into when your beliefs are false. Solving big problems like climate change will require technology, and technology requires engineering. Social justice and its critical methods have moved into engineering too. Here's something from the book, Engineering and Social Justice, now in its third edition, published by Purdue University Press. Purdue is a well-known engineering school. Quote, in Chapter 2, I identified the problem of worldview, in which engineers see themselves and the profession as apolitical, objective, and value neutral, allowing implicit assumptions about the world to govern our choices. Indeed, getting beyond views of truth as objective and absolute is the most fundamental change we need in engineering education. Getting beyond views of truth as objective and absolute in engineering is the most fundamental change we need to make, they say. Social justice will emancipate engineering from being constrained by objective truth. Good time to think about those O-rings again. This is a theme that is repeated everywhere throughout the social justice literature. Here we can find it in a recent book about the critical study of diet and nutrition. Quote, although we do not wholly reject the scientific method as a means of creating knowledge about the world, a critical orientation rejects the notion that it is even possible to produce knowledge that is objective, value-free, and untouched by human bias. A critical orientation similarly rejects the idea that any one way of creating knowledge about the world is superior to another, or is even sufficient. As such, critical approaches draw upon post-structuralism and feminist science to other windows, feminist science, that hold that there is not one truth that can be generated about any single thing, that multiple truths are possible depending on who is asking and for what purpose, and that knowledge is not apolitical, even when it is considered value neutral or unbiased. So social justice will emancipate us from relying upon the scientific method and the rigors of having to use better methods rather than more convenient ones, politically or otherwise, to answer questions about the world. The good news, I suppose, is that they don't wholly reject the scientific method. This morning I read from Sensoy and D'Angelo's widely applied critical education book. Here's what they say about this. Understanding knowledge as socially constructed uncovers the role of ideology in the construction of history. For example, the idea that progress is the result of a rational, objective, and value-neutral process, one that is removed from any political agenda, a product of reason alone. This picture of progress supports the belief that there is an objective truth, that it belongs to the West, and that this truth can be applied universally. That's what they have a problem with. A page later, they continue, the scientific method, sometimes referred to as positivism, was the dominant contribution of the 18th century Enlightenment period in Europe. Positivism rested on the importance of reason, principles of rational thought, the infallibility of close observation, and the discovery of natural laws and principles governing life and society. Critical theory developed in part as a response to this presumed superiority and infallibility of the scientific method, and raised questions about whose rationality and whose presumed objectivity underlies scientific methods. So again, we hear that social justice will emancipate us from truth and from science, even though science is an unparalleled method for finding out what is true. This is because the view in social justice, the view in critical theory, is that knowledge is a political project. Knowledge is just politics by other means. This echoes the words of another feminist professor, Joan Williams. States it succinctly with, "My goal is not to deliver the truth, but to inspire social change." It's fitting to hear the helicopters for the protests right now. To take one last example, we can find this theme also from the black feminist giant Audre Lorde, the same one that Allison Bailey quoted a few moments ago. Quote, "I have heard that accusation, that I'm contributing to the stereotype, that I'm saying the province of intelligence and rationality belongs to the white male. But if you're traveling a road that begins nowhere and ends nowhere, the ownership of the road is meaningless. If you have no land out of which the road comes, no place that the road goes to, geographically no goal, then the existence of that road is totally meaningless. Leaving rationality to white men is like leaving him a piece of that road that begins nowhere and ends nowhere." So rationality begins nowhere and ends nowhere. That's the view of social justice. Social justice will therefore emancipate us from believing in progress. So in some part, social justice is a revolution not just against liberalism, but also against science and our well-proved ability to ascertain useful truths about the world. Social justice will emancipate us from having to admit that we're wrong when being wrong would be politically useful. Social justice, which calls itself progressive, will emancipate us from believing in any kind of progress except what it calls progress. Amid whatever else it might achieve, social justice would emancipate us from deferring to what Kelly Oliver problematized as the absolute authority of recalcitrant nature. Social justice would emancipate us from the concern for truth that has let us manipulate our physical world and generate technological advances that have solved many of our problems. Think of sanitation in modern medicine, ending slavery, managing, not just creating, weapons of mass destruction. And that have generated immense freedom. Electricity, for example, is pretty helpful. Travel, devices that let us pursue our interests and dreams. Social justice will, in the name of progress, as it defines it, emancipate us from the rigor needed to uncover truths that make progress and can continue to make progress. The truth will set us free. We read that in the Bible, although we probably now associate it more strongly with abolitionists and civil rights leaders. That's because the truth is how we get to progress. Getting to the truth is how we keep getting to progress. And social justice will emancipate us from this process. It will liberate us to generate so-called truths, so-called knowledges, without having to do anything more than be politically strategic. The point of my talk today, though, is not to just continue railing on critical theory, as much as I would love to, and the ideology behind social justice and how they pose a unique and dangerous threat to advanced civilizations, liberalism, and freedom. I want to talk more today about progress and remind you that there is another way, which means by reminding you, you already know it. It's that progress is possible whenever we focus on getting things right. Almost everything in the world around us, almost everything in our day-to-day lives reminds us that progress is possible. So I was really worried to give this talk. I was worried because I don't know how to convince people of something that they might not believe when the evidence spends the entire day staring them in the face. I could come out and point at this evidence, like that you probably had a hot shower and clean water this morning, or that we live in a time of the lowest global infant mortality rates and the lowest global poverty rates in history. Steven Pinker does that very well, but it doesn't work. No offense to Mr. Pinker. Pinkerian optimism, as they call it, almost constantly gets made fun of, derided, criticized, and problematized, especially by advocates of social justice and critical theory, who see it as yet another means of maintaining the allegedly oppressive status quo. Pinker gets accused of every sort of identity-related malfeasance that you can imagine for supporting liberal systems, especially capitalism and rationality, and their ability to provide access to undeniable progress. As it turns out, funnily enough, as I was writing this portion of this talk, the first draft, I had retweeted Steven Pinker on Twitter, and somebody sniped back, accusing him of taking the view from Tel Aviv, with whatever implications that carries. So I wish I didn't have to be giving this talk, because Pinker makes the case really well. But maybe people don't care whether or not record numbers of abstract statistical babies don't die, or if abstract statistical people have enough to eat, and maybe a little more than that to pursue happiness and build a life. Maybe people don't care that much, that they now get almost none of the now abstract historical diseases that killed astonishing proportions of their forebears. Maybe people don't care that through decades of patient and difficult research, we may now be on the very edge of ending the abstract and remote, untellable human suffering of millions that's caused by an abstract and remote disease called malaria, which most of us will never get, and we'll never know anybody who will get it. They say, that malaria has been directly or indirectly responsible for 50% of the abstract statistical deaths in the history of humankind. Half of us, but none of us. So maybe we just don't care that much. Social justice would tell us that we don't care that much because those things mostly happen to brown and black people, and the white supremacy that we are all complicit in doesn't care about brown and black people. Like I said, they don't even understand the things they're criticizing. The thing is, I don't think they care about brown and black people all that much, except as a political strategy. Not really. Now, where it counts, all they really care about is that abstracted idea of brown and black people. Otherwise, they wouldn't be tearing down the very methods that have worked to improve countless lives, that will continue to improve countless more, like ending malaria, if we can believe in them and continue to defend them and continue to apply them. We can prove that we care about human suffering, no matter the race, sex, or creed, by caring about doing the hard work that is necessary to achieve progress, which starts by understanding that progress comes from the hard work of getting things right. That's how we accomplish progress. We accomplish the progress that we have by getting things right, by caring if our theories are true or false, by caring about, instead of problematizing, epistemic adequacy, which means caring whether or not our ideas are on solid ground before we attempt to apply them. By recognizing the absolute authority of recalcitrant nature is not a political contrivance made by humans to hold down women. It's just reality. By understanding that there are better and worse answers to questions about the world, and that better means closer to objectively true. Now, how can we know that there are better, it's silly we have to say this, there are better and worse answers? Because there are better answers. And how do we know that? Because we know that if I ask you how to tune a guitar, you already know that with a sledgehammer is a worse answer than some other possibilities. Or if I ask you how to change somebody's mind about something they believe, you know with a sledgehammer is a worse answer than some other possibilities. Those are the kinds of answers that we want to avoid. But if there are worse answers to our questions, then there must be better answers, because those two words operate in relation to one another. All answers are not equal. This is obvious. And it immediately follows that all methods for producing knowledge cannot be equal. So if I ask you how we might prevent the ravages of malaria, you might not have the slightest idea. But I bet you know that it has something to do with getting better answers to questions in biology and medicine, because malaria is biological. If I ask you how we can lower global poverty rates and unlock the unfathomable human potential that is currently suppressed by that poverty, you may not know what to do, but I bet you would accept that applying similar advances in knowledge and technology that we enjoy in cities like London would help, because London is well off. If I ask you how to deal with greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, you may not know any good answers. But I bet you know that they have something to do with chemistry and engineering and other sciences that believe in objective truth. If I ask you how to end racism, you also may not have any idea, but I bet you think it has something to do with treating everyone as an individual who will be judged by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin, instead of putting matters of identity first in literally everything. This is because you know that progress follows from getting better answers about the world, about reality, so we can use approaches that work. And you are completely surrounded by the evidence. I'm pretty sure you also know that we're not going to get anywhere close to any better answers by claiming that science is patriarchy or white supremacy or a product of the West. Quote, "A critical orientation rejects the idea that any one way of creating knowledge about the world is superior to another. They tell us this over and over again. Why? So their politically strategic theories, not true theories, but strategic theories, can be considered equally valid without having to submit themselves to the rigorous quality control checks that we demand in the sciences, medicine, engineering, and so on. Quality control checks that we demand not arbitrarily or because of politics, but because we have learned painfully, slowly, and I will add to great success, that reality, recalcitrant nature, is the thing you run into when your beliefs are false, and we know that progress is what you can get to when your beliefs are less false. How do we get to beliefs that are less false? Over the last few centuries, we have developed and honed a method of understanding the world that works. The critical theorists tell us, quote, "A critical orientation similarly rejects the idea that any one way of creating knowledge about the world is superior to another, and we know that is wrong. Ways of creating knowledge that depend upon systems of putting forth our best ideas and checking them, especially against evidence, those ways work. They produce knowledge, they produce progress, they will produce vaccines for malaria, and they will end a plague, another plague really, of human suffering. Wheat can be separated from chaff, but it requires first believing that there is wheat, that there is chaff that is different, and that we possess the tools necessary to tell them apart. Iron can sharpen iron, but the application must be correct. In simplest expression, method matters. We must understand what we would change. And we have discovered methods that work, methods that critical social justice would tear down and replace with political agendas that care only about power. That's not enough. It's reckless in the extreme to believe that there is no way of creating knowledge about the world that is superior to any other, or that knowledge is a contrivance of power. Rationality is not a road that leads from nowhere to nowhere. It is the road that led us out of the Middle Ages to modernity. Rationality is the road away from slavery and bondage, away from torture and superstition, away from astronomically high infant mortality rates and global poverty rates, away from anyone ever getting malaria again, and toward progress, to modern medicine, global food supply chains, vaccines for diseases that have brought untold suffering upon human beings for all of our history, to the freedom to pursue our own happiness, ambitions, and fulfillment, the likes of which the world has never seen. Of course, this is also, for the critical theorist, led to enough luxury to feel guilty about our success, enough privilege but not enough understanding to stare at our own good fortune and think only of how we have failed along the way to creating it. To think that maybe knowledge production is all just a political project, a strategy, not for human betterment, but to oppress those not like ourselves. And to tell us endlessly how unlike one another we all are. The generations that have entered this life behind me, and at 40 years old right now, I live precisely on that cusp, have a teleological problem, and we all kind of do right now. Teleological is a fancy philosophical word that means having to do with purpose. And we face some crises of human purpose right now. Some of these are unavoidable, and they're challenges that we have to face. We're less able to believe in the old religions of the world than we ever have been before. Serving God will work for some, it will give them purpose, but that number has dwindled, and to the best I can tell, will continue to shrink, at least throughout the West. Technology has made the demands of our physical labor easier, often even unnecessary. Machines and robots and advanced artificial systems, intelligent systems, are able to do much of the work that used to give people meaning at a fraction of the cost, both in terms of economics and human toil and suffering. And this produces freedom, the likes of which we've never known, but it does not tell us what to do with our freedom. And it offers so much choice that it can be hard to know what to do with it and ourselves. Social justice offers purpose, easy access purpose, that is exempted from the demands of rigor and difficulties of finding truth, but offers the promise of remaking society for the better. Purpose not through production, but through criticism. Not through actually making the world a better place, but by complaining about how it already isn't a better place. And most importantly, by teaching other people to complain about how the world already isn't a better place. And we've already raised one generation, the one just younger than I am, people aged roughly 25 to 38 right now, with critical methods. To believe that everything is problematic, or at least contains problematics. Somehow we thought that teaching a generation of our young people to think like this was a good idea. Or at least the critical education theorists who took over our schools of education in the 1980s did. Somehow we or they thought it was a good idea to teach a generation of young, impressionable minds to see problems in everything. Somehow we thought it was a good idea to replace education in subjects like civics, history, and economics with criticism, with critical theory. For those of you that know it, you might be amused or horrified to know that the second assigned activity in Sensoi and D'Angelo's critical social justice education book is to read Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, which is a critical take of American history. So you have to remember, this is a very specific kind of criticism. It is not critical thinking. Allison Bailey told us this is not critical thinking. This is not criticism that seeks to improve ideas, iron sharpening iron, but criticism that seeks to dissolve them, to deconstruct them, to tear them down. Iron can sharpen iron, but enough time and enough acid will dissolve it. Now we're educating a second generation, maybe 10, 12 years old to 24 right now. We're gearing up to educate a third generation. I hear from concerned parents and educators almost every day. They won't leave me alone, in fact. Not just with critical methods, but with critical methods on steroids. Following the lead of a handful of all I can conclude is bitter and cynical theorists, we are teaching our children and grandchildren to see systems of racism, sexism, homophobia, and other bigotries literally everywhere throughout society, and teaching them how to interpret and reinterpret everyday and routine interactions as events that prove the system is rigged and hateful, and that they are complicit in this problem and constantly need to do better. I've read their books. It's a consistent theme. Following the lead of cynical theorists, we're inserting this manner of education into everything. To give you some idea, it's in mathematics education. A new ethnic studies program for primary and secondary education in Seattle, Washington, implemented this year, urges mathematics instructors to explore questions such as these. Who holds power in a mathematical classroom? As a former mathematician, let me just say I don't know what a mathematical classroom is. We called them mathematics classrooms, but at any rate. Is there a place for power and authority in a mathematical classroom? Who gets to say if an answer is right? Remember, this is in a math class. Can you recognize and name oppressive mathematical practices in your experience? How can our stories be valued as data points to impact change? When has math been used historically to resist and to liberate? Why and how, this is, I think, my favorite, why and how do data-driven processes prevent liberation? How and why do mathematical processes demand collective thinking? How can we change mathematics from individualistic thinking to collectivist thinking? I have the document printed out with me if anybody wants to see it. I forgot to bring it up and hold it up like a flag, but it's here. So rather than learning the mathematical skills and tools that could lead them to becoming scientists or engineers who could help us solve our problems and contribute to real progress, our mathematics courses are being turned into social justice. Quote, who gets to say if an answer is right in math? Quote, a critical orientation rejects the idea that any one way of creating knowledge about the world is superior to another. Quote, the goal should be to develop strategic theories, not true theories, not false theories, but strategic theories as political tools. Quote, how can we change mathematics from individualistic thinking to collectivist thinking? This will not help our society's growing teleological problem. It will make it worse. Because if it is successful, it will educate a generation of complainers, not a generation of builders or doers. It will fail to give people a path to purpose. So we have a choice to make. Do we want to be the kind of society that thinks that each generation can be better than the last, one that celebrates success, that believes improvement is possible and works for it? Or do we want to be a society of apparently bitter and angry people who preach cynicism like it's some kind of enlightened wisdom? Do we want to be the kind of society that teaches our young people how to participate in the process that built the modern world? A process that recognizes truly radical things like that there are right answers in mathematics that have nothing to do with our feelings, our race, or our stories, but that are arrived at through mathematical analysis. Do we want them to understand engineering as a process that recognizes objective truth, a process that puts truth and falsity ahead of politics and strategy? Or do we want to be the kind of society that teaches them that everything is about power and oppression, that everything, literally everything outside of one specific narrow ideology is problematic? So we have a choice. You have a choice, I have a choice, I made my choice. We can equip ourselves and our children with the tools to build societies and meet our challenges, both technological and teleological, or we can continue to hand them the solvent that dissolves liberal societies. We have every reason to believe that progress is possible. We have every reason because we live in the world that progress has made, not by critical methods. We have every reason to believe that the systems we have developed to generate progress, reason and rationality, science, dialectic and debate, soundness, validity, conceptual clarity in our arguments, steady, incremental improvement by constructive, not cynical criticism, that these systems actually work. They generate progress. They don't talk about progress. They don't complain about progress or how everything isn't perfect. They generate progress. And they will keep generating progress increasingly for everybody, unless we abandon them for power and political tools. I think we should have faith then. Not faith in progress, because progress is not inevitable. It is in fact hard-won, and it's fragile, and it can be dissolved by cynicism and excessive underinformed criticism, which corrode and corrupt both our belief in the possibility of progress and the means by which we can achieve progress. I think we should have faith in systems that produce progress, like liberalism, science, capitalism, caring about epistemic adequacy, dialogue, debate, testing one idea against another, checking against evidence, caring about truth and falsity, not merely politics and strategy, maybe not seeing everything as an application of power. I guess it's maybe a little bit funny to have an openly declared atheist standing in front of you telling you that you should have faith. But let me tell you, if I were writing my memoirs right now, the chapter that encapsulates the last several months of my journey would be titled Finding Faith. So here's what I mean. Here's what I'm learning. Faith is a kind of confidence that you can have when you believe in the method that is used to produce progress in something, even when that outcome is not certain. My friend in the back, you'll hear from him later, you saw him earlier, Peter, he practices a martial art called jiu-jitsu. I'd have Peter wave to you, but he's way in the back and no one wants to turn their head, I promise. He tells us about his jiu-jitsu all the time. So faith is showing up to a jiu-jitsu school and looking at the program and believing this can work for me. This can make me good at jiu-jitsu. If I do this, I can make progress. This isn't blind faith. This is something different. Blind faith would come without evaluating the method. Blind faith might be showing up to a dance studio or going on YouTube and watching a bunch of karate videos and making fun of them, and believing through whatever set of delusions that can make someone good at jiu-jitsu. Well, I've met Peter's jiu-jitsu teacher, and I have faith that his program works. I have faith in our other systems as well, not blind faith, but reasoned faith, the kind of faith Peter can put in his jiu-jitsu teacher, the kind of faith that I put in a bridge every time I go across it because the engineering wasn't social justice engineering. I believe in the processes of science and liberal societies. I believe they work, I believe they create progress, and I think we can have faith in them. If you look around, if you think about the marvels you've already experienced today, throughout this week, like your hot shower and clean water, and really think about it. But that's just a start. Our system of knowledge production works because the method works. Method matters. The method isn't one that pits one set of political views against another, applying that which is strategic over that which is true. It is not trying to assert some imaginary freedom of knowledge which does not exist. Critical methods do not offer access to freedom of knowledge. They try to, but they are medievalism by allegedly progressive means. They are the road back to the bad old times that rationality let us walk away from. The method we should believe in is open debate, free dialogue, freedom of thought, conscience, and speech. It's reason, it's science, it's appealing to the authority of the evidence from recalcitrant nature. It's these things that produce the alchemy of a liberal society that I spoke about this morning. These produce knowledge and progress, and we can believe in them. They are what we must defend, and we must defend them against censorship, no matter how good the intentions. We must defend them against cynicism, including the kinds that believe that progress is a road from nowhere to nowhere, or that skepticism is an exercise of power, or that knowledge is just politics by other means. We must defend them against losing the plot or choosing some other plot entirely, replacing the pursuit of truth against falsehood with the pursuit of political strategy, or rejecting the idea that one method of generating knowledge about the world is better than any other. To defend this system, we need to learn to spot the cynicism of critical methods and treat it accordingly, like an industrial solvent that has a particular, narrow, useful application. Not something you would spill all over everything, flood society with, or hand out to children in our schools. We have to be careful because cynical criticisms can be subtle. As Sensoi and D'Angelo wrote, critical theory developed in part as a response to this presumed superiority and infallibility of the scientific method, and raised questions about whose rationality and whose presumed objectivity underlies the scientific method. So I'll answer and make a final point. Whose rationality? Human rationality. Humans of every possible identity configuration, even non-humans, can all use the scientific methods and the knowledge-producing methods of liberal societies, and they work. Everybody is welcome to use them, and they work the same for everybody because recalcitrant nature doesn't lie to anybody. It also doesn't let anybody off the hook. As I said, reality is the thing you run into when your beliefs are false, every time. Anything that seeks to emancipate us from this simple truth cannot emancipate us at all. Because when our liberal systems fail, that's when the critical theorists are right. Then it's all about power. So whose presumed objectivity? Nobody's. That's the trick. The critical theorists think they discovered this. They didn't discover anything profound by seeing that humans can be biased. There haven't been that many scientists in a long time who are confused about that. The critical theorists have just failed to understand that liberal systems, including science, already know this and already use the tools of critical thinking that they think they discovered, and they can use them responsibly. The progress we get by liberalism and science doesn't belong to any one person or group of people. It belongs, in some sense, to everybody and nobody at once, because it belongs to the system, the liberal system that proposes ideas and checks them against other ideas and ultimately against the absolute authority of the truth of nature. It belongs to the freedom to pursue truth wherever it leads, regardless of political strategy, and not starting with our conclusions and working backwards. It begins with cognitive liberty. So if we want to believe in progress, and we should, what we have to do is trust the system and keep defending it, especially against people with good intentions who think they can make it better by restricting it, remaking it into something it cannot be, or reinventing it to suit their politics. As soon as we believe that knowledge is a political project, we abandon the system that leads us to knowledge and progress. We walk ourselves out of light and back into darkness, as Michael told us this morning. When we have faith in knowledge and progress and in the systems that produce them, we can keep walking the road that led us here, out of the Middle Ages, up to the present, and that will keep leading us to an even better future for ourselves and our children. This is our choice to make. I hope we choose well. Thank you.